Hello everyone, and thanks so much for all the support with my videos, the likes, shares, comments. I'm very grateful to everybody who supports me through buying me a coffee also as well. Today I'm speaking about what's been going on in Europe over the last number of days, a few economic and from a monetary and fiscal and financial standpoint. We've seen dramatic moves and discussions over the last number of days by Kaja Kallas and Emmanuel Macron and echoed by Pascal Donoghue, our Minister for Finance here in Ireland, around the drive towards Eurobonds in the context of continuing the funding of the Ukraine war. Now, we've seen dramatic shifts over the past number of days. We've seen the Munich Security Council, a conference that was held. We've also seen Macron calling up to 20 European Union leaders to Paris for discussions about the possibility of putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. And following on from this, we've seen the response by Vladimir Putin in the context to say if there are boots on the ground of France or German troops or British troops, that would be seen as an existential threat and would lead to a wider escalation and a move towards a possible nuclear exchange, which is unthinkable, as we can see the fanatics pushing for more war instead of pushing for peace. We've seen a lot of bilateral agreements with countries over the past number of days. We've seen countries like France, as I said, Germany, Britain, doing deals with Ukraine, where it's at the behest of the Ukrainian parliament now to decide if they need to get troops from those countries on the ground. And currently there are up to 20,000 NATO troops involved in a military exercise in Romania on the borders of Ukraine also as well. And we've seen the other developments in that region with Transnistria looking to align with the Russian Federation. We know the pressures they're under from Moldova and Moldova's push to join the European Union. Recently there was a meeting in Chisinau where there was a push of the European Union again towards pushing Moldova towards moving a pace towards the European Union, such as many more countries as well. So with all these developments, they're huge geopolitically. Instead of looking for peace, the warmongers are pursuing an agenda of more war, and they're looking to boost and bolster the military-industrial complex in Europe. And how this directly impacts Ireland, as we've spoken about in many videos, has been through the migration chaos. Over 100,000 Ukrainians now in Ireland, which has caused huge issues in Irish society with the impacts on the working class most of all because of lack of access to basic services and people struggling to get a roof over their head, and not to mention the spiralling cost of living disaster after the fallout of lockdowns. And then on top of that, we've seen the supply lines being cut off. And now with the war in Ukraine, where we see here in Ireland and Europe paying sky high bills for energy, which is absolutely just catastrophic and causing absolute carnage in so many people's lives domestically here in Ireland. Not to mention businesses also as well, who are suffering the fallout of that with more and more businesses closing because of high energy costs and high bills. So with all this perfect storm, we can see a move towards more authoritarianism in Europe and more centralised control. And we've seen that through the statements from Micheál Martin in Ireland. We've seen it through the statements from Varadkar and even Pascal Donoghue, who is supporting the reappointment of Ursula von der Leyen, who's up for a new term of the European Commission presidency in the next number of months. And we know that she was pushed into this role, unelected, unaccountable leader who's heavily involved with contracts, with the Pfizer contracts. We know she's currently under investigation by the European Public Prosecution's Office, which has gone silent around that, which about doing contract deals with Pfizer in relation to the COVID jab. And we know also as well about the impacts of the push for her to tackle misinformation and disinformation. We've seen the opening up of the Commission in Le Monde here in Ireland, our own troop ministry that I've spoken about in previous videos. and also spoken about the impacts that's going to have on freedom of expression, which is enshrined in our Irish constitution, but again, which is under huge attack because of the drive towards more authoritarianism in Ireland and across Europe. And we've seen that drive happen apace. And what they're trying to do now, on top of the budget and sending more money to Ukraine with the €50 billion budget, they're looking at seizing Russian assets as well. Up to $300 billion of Russian assets are currently being probed to try and to be got at, which is causing consternation, to put it mildly, in the financial markets internationally, and the trust that is breaking down in Europe as well by many investors and many people who are looking at what's going on in terms of the United States pushing their hegemony, and in the context of the insecurity of any investors' cash in Europe. Now, as well, it's interesting because over 180 billion euro of that is currently in Belgium, and that's in the clearinghouse Euroclear. And it's interesting because in the last number of days, we've seen the European Parliament pushing through this plan to send a €50 billion over 4 years budget deal to Ukraine to profit the military industrial complex, BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan, all these people who are making huge money for it. And of course, we can't remember 10% for the big guy, Joe Biden. So we look at all this sort of stuff happening, and people in the Congress making huge money out of it as well. And that guy, Verhofstadt, he was an ex-Prime Minister of Belgium, and he's now a member of the European Parliament. And he was speaking about trying to push through these funds to Ukraine. And it's interesting as well that he is the next Belgian Prime Minister, and over 180 billion of this is in Belgium. Surprise, surprise. Follow the money. And it's interesting because the World Bank has also said it will cost over $400 billion to rebuild Ukraine. Now, we can see how everything is going, how this war is going, and we can see a lot of talk around the move towards Eurobonds and war bonds to keep the war going. And this is interesting to develop because Macron, as I said, has been talking about more escalation to keep the war going. Ireland as well. Micheál Martin has been pushing for more war and looking for Ireland to join NATO. Recently, there was an article in one of the Irish newspapers about the threat from Russia to Ireland and all this type of nonsense that's coming through the mainstream media to pump up fear, pump up emotion. People find a boogeyman, find an enemy, and that's Vladimir Putin. And it's interesting as well because they need the money. And how are they going to get the money? They're going to get the money through printing money and the budget, where we're going to give more money into the European budget every year in Ireland to get the same level of public services. That's what Michael McGrath, our Minister for Finance, has said 2 months ago in an interview, where he said we would have to contribute more to maintain the same amount of social public services. And we know how bad the public services are in Ireland, where we have over 1 million people on hospital waiting lists. We have over 13,500 people in so-called emergency accommodation. Over 4,000 of those are children. And shamefully, nearly 300,000 people as well are so-called hidden homeless. And then on top of that, in the last number of days, we had a horrific death. And our thoughts and prayers go out to the victim, a woman, Anne Delaney, who passed away, who was homeless, 47 years of age. A mother, was a nurse previously as well, a person who cared for all of us. And in her time of need, she was not cared for and protected for by the state. And that's an indictment of Ireland in 2024, because this is commonplace to what's happening in Ireland. And our thoughts and prayers are with Anne, her family and her friends and everybody who knew her as well, because it's just barbaric to consider this is going to continue and continue and continue, and it's used as a threat by people and by the government, that if people don't comply or lose their job, they'll end up on the streets and end up in that position as well. So this is part of their agenda, rather than dealing with the genesis of the crisis, and many of these crises which they create themselves, as I said, through the immigration chaos and all the stuff that they're creating in Ireland, all down to supporting the policies of the European Union. Now, it's also interesting, as I said, about the Eurobonds, because the European Commission has always been looking to centralise more power Over 70-75% of the legislation that comes into Ireland comes through the lobbyists into the European Commission, then goes into European Parliament, and then is transposed into Irish law. So this is a huge centralised grab of power by the European Commission. And what they've always looked for, apart from the single currency and the European Central Bank, is to bring tighter financial integration. And this is what people like Macron has been speaking about. He spoke about it at the WEF in Davos a number of weeks ago. Kaja Kallas has said it previously. Back in 2022, even Pascal Donoghue, the Irish Minister for Public Expenditure, was Minister for Finance at that time, and he is president of the Eurogroup, which is chair of all the European Union finance ministers. He sets the agenda, provides the minutes, chairs the meetings of these groups that is held. And this agenda has been to push forward a more integrated financialised Europe. And as I said, they've had control of the monetary policy, they had control of the fiscal policy, and what's the next push? To get control of the war bonds. And what that would mean are so-called, tamely called Eurobonds. And this is where they have complete control of going to the markets, and where normally sovereign governments will go into the markets to provide debt or provide loans, as well to fund day-to-day expenditure, enrich the bankers as well, and huge investors. We see that in Ireland, where we have €42,000 of national debt for every man, woman and child. To break it down simply, how that means is that they now want to enter the market as their own entity and would borrow from the market as well. So they're looking for at least 110 billion for this to be sent to Ukraine. And that would mean an extra tax on the people of Europe. So here we go. More centralised power. Now the taxation rights are going to be coming into the European Commission, where they're going to put an extra taxation on people to pay for drive towards a military union and to fund the corrupt regime, Zelensky regime in Ukraine, and all the people who are going to benefit from this with the rebuilding Ukraine programs such as BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan, and all these huge multinationals. And this has been a long time coming, because as I said, the European Union treaties have allowed a position, for instance, to borrow from international markets, and this has always been a drive of the European Union. This has always been a huge push to borrow from international markets and have an unelected, unaccountable body doing it, such as European Commission, with Ursula von der Leyen at the helm. It really spells dramatic dangers for what's happening to our lives here in Ireland and across Europe as well. And the European Commission will look for bond issuance to fund European Union policy programs, whatever they see fit, essentially, at behest of the big corporations and the lobbyists. That's what they want to do. And they've did it previously with the previous bonds, such as the next generation green bonds that they're trying to push on now for clean energy, sustainable energy, part of the UN sustainable goals, as we all know. And this is a big push to get bonds for this green, clean energy. They use the Sure bonds as well, which during the COVID lockdowns, for instance, where it provided the greatest transfer of wealth towards the billionaires. And we've seen the payments of short-term employment schemes through this Sure bonds. And what the Ukraine bonds are going to come under is the macro financial assistance bonds, which again would provide medium and long-term loans to Ukraine, and would allow for huge amounts of money to be transferred out of the public purse through bonds that we're going to pay for through our taxation and through more indebtedness and essentially more austerity and a more degradation of social and public services, so the corporations can profit, which is just a complete sleight of hand. And this is based contingent on a number of reforms being carried out by Ukraine also as well. And they've also looked, as I said, as other agencies such as Euratom, which is an agency for nuclear programs and atomic nuclear energy as well. And again, we've seen this push over the last number of years. It's always been a push through from people like Barroso many years ago. As I said, Kaja Kallas has spoken about it, Macron has spoken about it, an integrated financial market. And now they're in a difficulty because they can't raise capital because of high interest rates as well to compete on the market. And it is important that they have to have this position now financially to do this. And they'll use it as an excuse to say, this is going to be good for the citizens. It's going to create a threat because of what's happening. We could boost up the military industrial complex. It can bolster up a European Union army. and then we can take on the great boogeyman that is Vladimir Putin, that they're trying to create through their myth and propaganda, perpetuated by the mainstream media as well. So this is what's happening with these Eurobonds, and not a lot of people are going to be aware of what's going on. They're going to think they're tamely enough named bonds, but again, it's another huge attack on our sovereignty, a huge attack on any notion of democracy as we drive towards totalitarianism, where we see a huge power grab by these unelected, power-hungry fanatics who serve the ultra-rich, super-rich, and the 1%. And as I've said, Macron has been very much pushing this. He's been looking at trying to build up so-called industries. And what industries are they? The war industries. And that's who they want to benefit. But what also is important with this is the drive towards the European army. And this has always been the agenda of the European Union, as we've seen a drive towards more militarism and being part of NATO. And maybe there are some analysts speaking about NATO as being the outward-looking army, such as take on enemies that they would see fit, that would, in terms of their trade and access to resources, such as what they're looking for in the Russian Federation, with 40% of the world's resources in Russia, and they can get control. And recently, the European Parliament has organised meetings around this, where they've tried to reimagine the new Russian Federation, which we've broken up and will be a neoliberal manna for these fanatics who serve the ultra-rich and 1%. And this is what's happening, and we can see it happening dramatically with the European Union army, again, which might turn inwards, as some people are talking about, and in terms of trying to control the populations here in Europe and keep them in line. So, we're going to be paying for it, and they're trying to make us pay for it and pull the wool over our eyes. And this is what they're doing here in Ireland through Pascal Donoghue's policies. This is as a yes man for the European Union. We've seen it with Varadkar, a yes man for the WEF and the European Union. We've seen it with Michal Martin, another yes man, Eamon Ryan, who said authoritarianism was a good form of, it's a good system to control people. So this is what they want. It's corporate fascism, and that's what it's becoming, where a corporate state has complete control. They have the politicians completely captured and the political establishment captured, and this would having dramatic impacts on a local level here in Ireland. And it's important to note that as they drive towards this, we could see all the other stuff, so much other stuff happening in terms of the hate speech laws, Digital Services Act, the Ministry of Truth commissioning them on, all this sort of stuff happening in Irish society at the same time. So there's a lot of chaos being created. We've seen it through the immigration policies as well, where so much chaos is going to be created. But then the Irish government are continuing to push this war rather than actually look for peace, which have huge implications on our immigration fallout we've seen here in Ireland. But again, they're more interested in serving the big industrialists, the big bosses, the big corporations, the big interests in society and the 1% who are more interested in getting cheap labour, and this is what they're looking for as well through their immigration chaos they're created in society here in Ireland. So it's very important to note what's happening and to be aware of what's happening when they're talking about these war bonds and Eurobonds and all this obscure language around it, which they make pretty technical and complicated and nuanced. There are slight nuances to it, but the important thing to know is to have an overview of it and to understand really what's going on and to make people aware of what's going on as they drive towards more centralised power, more control, and they're going to push it through their corporate climate agenda as well, with all the stuff that's coming down the line as well in terms of attacking ordinary people and our basic civil rights and our basic prospect of ever living in a democracy. We need to stand up, speak out about what's going on here in Ireland, across Europe. If you're watching my videos, I'm very glad that you support my work. Please press subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please press like to my Facebook page and follow me on other platforms too as well. And I'm very grateful to everybody who does support me through buying me a coffee. I'm very grateful, and I'm very glad that you join me on my videos. And please invite your friends also to like my videos, because my pages are growing, but I need your support out there so the truth is told and people can get the real information out to more and more people, to what's going on, and not get the wool pulled over their eyes continually and to wake up to what's going on with the mainstream narrative that's been pushed down people's throat morning, noon and night here in Ireland, and I'm sure across Europe as well. So from Dublin, take care, and I'll talk to you all soon. And thanks so much for all your support. Bye bye. See you later. Bye bye.